Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
Wednesday, and all of our guests today, including John Shannon, standing by. Brought to you by our title sponsor, Able Auctions, ableauctions.ca. As we're joined now by NHL Analyst, a hockey storyteller, and co-host of a new podcast. It's called 100% Hockey, Rick, with Darren Millard.
Nice.
And John Shannon joins us now. John, thanks for doing this, sir. How are you?
I'm great, boys. How are you?
Very good. Before we talk about 100% hockey, you're from Oliver, BC. I'm not really sure about this, but I think it's apple country, and we've been talking about the best apple. My vote goes to Pink Lady. Ryan likes his Macintosh. What about yourself?
First of all, that last 10 minutes was as close to a Seinfeld episode as I've ever heard. That was, the great discussion about nothing other than apples. I mean, that was fantastic. Well, I tell you what, I'm an old-fashioned guy, and yes, R.J. Shannon used to have an 11-acre apple orchard in downtown Oliver.
Yeah.
So, and it was Macintosh, and it was Goldens, and it was Reds. So this is before all the fancy new stuff. But and if I had a preference of a crisp apple off a tree, it was a Golden by far. Golden by far. But it had to be off the tree. You couldn't go to the store and buy it,
I hate to say this, John, but you sound like an apple snob.
Yeah.
Oh no, we were listen, when you grow up in an orchard, you were a snob. Most of it's now winery or vineyards now, not apple orchards, but there's still lots of apple orchards in the South Okanagan. Absolutely.
Yeah, I can't wait to get back up there. Okay, 100% Hockey, new podcast with Darren Millard, our friend. What can you tell us about it?
Well, it's I did a little bit of research after I left the McCowan show, and what advertising people and what podcast people are telling me that there's still a huge market in both Canada and the United States for a hockey show, and so it just made some sense. As you guys know, Darren and I have been friends for years. He lives in Las Vegas. I live in Toronto. And part of our selling point is that there's hockey outside of the Eastern Seaboard. And so I think it's important to be able to talk about all the teams at all the time. And it is 100% hockey, because my old pal McCowan used to make fun of me every time we did hockey. He would just say, hockey, 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 hockey. Well, you know what? It drives the boat, as Rick said earlier. It drives the boat, and that's what we're going to talk. We're going to do it 3 times a week, starting very soon.
Okay. No date yet for the first show. We'll look forward to that.
Well, we're actually in discussions. It could be as early as next Monday if everything falls into place, but it may be a couple of weeks down the road. So who knows?
A couple of Westerners, John from Oliver, as we mentioned, and Darren from, if I'm not mistaken, Brandon, Manitoba. Hey, John, we've talked a lot today about what happened last night at Rogers Arena and the Canucks losing in overtime to the St. Louis Blues. Just 4 regulation wins so far, or 4 wins, period, at Rogers Arena. And a lot of people saying one of the problems is, it wasn't a problem last year, but the atmosphere at Rogers Arena. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, or the old atmosphere at the Coliseum, but what's the most alive, most energetic building in the National Hockey League?
For my money, there's 2, and they're very different. Montreal, obviously, is, I think the pinnacle. I think that the fans understand the game so well. They respect the game so well. In these days in Montreal, you have to be very patient about it as well. And the other place I love going to games purely for the atmosphere is Madison Square Garden. Yeah. I think it's difficult to beat. It truly is. Now, Vegas has done a good job. Seattle has done a good job, but there's still something magic about going to the Garden and standing and watching these hardcore hockey fans in New York and dancing Larry up in the Upper Blues, and it's a really cool atmosphere. They haven't had much to cheer about in New York recently, but when they get going, it is wild.
Well, it's funny you say that, John. Not a lot to cheer about when you talk about the Canucks on home ice. Not good at all. They're not as good as last year. talk got a little testy with the media last night. What's your take on what's happening out in Vancouver right now?
Well, it's inexplicable what they do at home. Because, look at the success they have had on the road. I mean, they're one of the best road teams in the league. Perhaps there is too much pressure, but you know what? Get over it. That shouldn't be a problem. Perhaps they are trying too hard. Get over it. That shouldn't be a problem. This is a skilled hockey club that can play with the best of them. Do I believe it'll turn around? Yeah, it will turn around. The same thing happened last year in my mind in Edmonton very early, and they turned it around, and home ice became a huge factor. I'm convinced still in Vancouver it will become a positive for this hockey club. And if you look at the record, I had a brief conversation with Jim Rutherford about it last week. He talked about the learning curve that came out of the playoffs. It wasn't the curve that they imagined it would be, because it actually got more difficult for the team. And it took, those first few games at home where the team did not play well. And then when they came back after their road trip, they did not play well at all. Even, in fact, let's face it, they played worse. That's the thing that's put them in this rut of playing at home. But I do think they're playing out of it. I think at times last night, they were by far the better team. I think that having Demko back at this point will be a positive. But I'm not as worried about the home record as a lot of people are in Vancouver.
John, I want to ask you about those Rangers. They are 2-8 since the GM sent out a memo saying Kreider's available, Trouba's available. Are you connecting the dots here? I mean, I don't think he wanted that to get public, that memo. It did get public. It got into the media. But what's going on in New York right now?
Well, I think what happened with the email that he sent, that Chris Drury sent to the other managers, was more of a symptom of what's gone on for the last year and a bit. This all started last summer with the Barclay Goodrow issue.
Yep.
He wasn't supposed to be traded, but he got traded to San Jose. The Trouba stuff came out that he turned down the offer to go to Detroit in a trade. Chris Drury sent that email out, but I just wonder now the relationship between Drury and the other managers.
That's it.
Because darn well, the managers leaked this out to somebody else, or at least one of the managers did. And so you have to wonder what that relationship is all about. I'm really amazed. We've heard about the pressure on Kreider. We've heard the pressure on Trouba when he was there. On other players, Adam Fox's name has come up this last week. We've heard Peter Laviolette's name, but we're not hearing pressure on Chris Drury. Yeah. And I'm truly shocked about that, because Chris Drury's had a time to rebuild this organization after he took over from John Davidson and Jeff Gordon. But I don't understand why there isn't more pressure on him, at least publicly, because darn well that the owner, James Dolan, is going to be angry. The last time they lost at home, when Trouba was still the captain, there was a private meeting between the owner, Dolan, Laviolette, Drury, and Trouba after the game, which delayed Laviolette's press conference by more than an hour. And things seem to have changed a little bit since then. So you have to wonder really what's going on behind the scenes to create an atmosphere. MSG and the Rangers used to be the Cadillac of franchises. Treat people perfectly. That's just not the case now.
Hey, John, I know you were listening to our show earlier, and this subject came up. I'm not sure if you were listening at this point, but whatever happened to, and we've noticed just lately, and maybe understandably so, that Rick Tocchet looks a little bit frustrated talking with the media. What happened to assistant coaches talking with the media? Is that come from the league? Is it team by team? What do you know about that?
Well, it is certainly not league doctrine at all. It comes from each individual coaching staff or the management team. The challenge of that is that you have to make sure that the assistant coach is preaching the same message that the head coach is. For instance, Mike Babcock was adamant that he was the only guy to speak to the media wherever he coached, even when he was coaching Team Canada. Mike Babcock was going to be the only coach with the message. That's strictly a individual team situation, and there are times that it does make sense maybe to have another voice talk to the media. The other thing is to consider perhaps the assistant coaches don't want to speak.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's why they're assistant coaches as opposed to head coaches.
I know they're doing well financially, and it's a great job and all that. I just think every once in a while, maybe a head coach would like a break, and it seemed to be not a big deal. Back when I was reporting a million years ago.
Yes,
but I tell you what, though, Donnie, and you bring up a good point. But the whole scope of who gets interviewed, how and when and why has changed so much.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, when you guys
random.
were both on the all the time, you could walk in the room and every player was at his stall.
yeah.
And you could walk up to anybody. Now you have to request 3 players.
Yep.
And these are self-imposed rules that, I think we're losing focus about what makes athletes so approachable because, the teams are not allowing it to happen near as much. And I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, we got to get that time tunnel built, John. Thanks for this, my friend.
That was a good show, the time tunnel. Was that a good show?
Now we're going way back. Hop in a time tunnel and get some of those golden apples you were talking about in Oliver, BC, in the Shannon Orchard. Perfect.
That's right.
Yeah.
Road 3B, baby.
Thanks for this, John.
Cheers.